So with that, I will pull up the agenda briefly and just go over it. It's welcome and introduction, so we'll all introduce ourselves, go over the budget and funding update, move on to implementation topics around contracts, vendor support, and then any other topics that people would like to offer. So I will start. I am Deb Poulin. I'm the Director of Clinical Services with the Office of Behavioral Health, also a member of MRC and the treasurer and chair of this meeting. Chastity.
Hi, everyone. Chastity Toole, the Executive Director of Maine Recovery Council.
Thank you. And Daryl?
Good morning. My name is Daryl Stewart. I'm the Acting State Budget Officer and a member of the MRC. Thanks.
And
Brendan O'Neill from the Maine Attorney General's Office, and we publish information about opioid settlement funds expected and received.
And Paul?
Paul Vinsel, addiction medicine physician, member of the Maine Recovery Council. And Deb, I will be taking notes and I'll get the minutes into Grayson.
You are amazing. Thank you. It's, as you know, because I've seen you do it, it's hard to facilitate and take notes at the same time. So I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And Elizabeth?
Hi, I am Elizabeth Fortier, and I am the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
Thank you. And Grayson?
Hi, my name is Grayson, and I'm with the Attorney General's Office.
Thank you. And Daryl, you did not hear my disclaimer 2 meetings ago. I am not an accountant, nor am I a financial analyst. I stepped into the position when it was needed, so you are really getting a simplified version of accounting here. So it's a layman presentation. If you have questions or critiques or otherwise, I would be very welcoming of those because I'm truly not a finance person. So, all right, let me pull up our latest funding and budget update. And I am, just to reacclimate us, going to go back to June because now we have June, July, and August since I've been in this position. And we can take a look at where we are. So I've got my shared screens and I want to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Am I sharing? Do you see just my desktop or do you see an Excel sheet?
Your desktop.
Okay, let me try
but
this again.
I really like the photo.
Hey, thanks. I think it's Microsoft generated. Ah, there it is. Okay. Now you should be seeing a spreadsheet.
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is June, and we went over June in the last meeting that we had. So I won't go over the details other than to just show you that our beginning ledger balance was 32.5 million, and we had an ending ledger balance of 26.7. And then you go to July because we had a conversation about our balances decreasing over time. We're not there yet. When you go to July, and then I'll circle back, you see that our beginning is 26.7 and the ending remains around 26.4. So there wasn't much of a decrease there. And then you go to August and we're back up because we've had some deposits come in and some revenue. So even though we talked about that decrease over time, and I showed you Ben Mann's spreadsheet so far, and again, it's only 3 months, we're doing pretty well. So going back to just a comparison, in June, we had a number of contracts paid out, and you can see all of the different contracts and the amount that was paid out to them, really actually highlighting a monumental amount of work that MRC did and Barry done and otherwise to get those contracts out and to get those payments out. In July, you see very little. You just see Lakes Region, Volunteers of America, the Opportunity Alliance, and then our payment to Barry Dunn. So in terms of the contract total, it's a much smaller list, not a lot going out in comparison to June. Staff expenses right here, and I did note that Sarah Yasner, I included her in the staff expenses. As you know, I'm trying, because this is a very public forum, I'm trying to have a modicum of privacy around staff salaries and otherwise. So there's your total staff expenses and of course the stay cap. Any questions on that?
Deb, could you
Yes.
show the June budget again and then the
Yes.
August one for
Yes,
me,
of course.
please?
Yeah, and I'm going really fast. I
Yeah,
tend to
don't
be
go
a
fast.
fast mover, so you can slow me down at any point in time.
Okay.
And Paul, of course, this is going to be posted to the Recovery Council's YouTube channel, so it's available for review.
Okay, good. And now August, please.
Of course. And this is August, and we were going to transition to August anyway, so I'll take the opportunity to just note that in the right-hand box, it went from expense detail to expense/revenue detail because we didn't really have anything going out. We only had money coming in, which was a nice shift in some ways. In other ways, it's our job to get that money out to our communities. So the good news is that it helped our balance a bit to stay stable. We did not have any contract monies going out. Staff expenses were up a little bit higher, and then there's stay cap, which is just what it is. And that is where we are right now in terms of our financial situation. We have, oh, Brendan, please.
At some point, do you want any sort of, explanation or discussion about, why there hasn't been money going out in July and August?
Yes, that,
Okay.
yeah, I was actually going to have that as part of the contract updates.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but if you think that now is a good time, I'm fine with that.
Only just briefly, and I think it makes more sense to do it in more in depth during the contract part, but just as big picture for those viewing the presentation. Again, our office has the bank account, and we had, certain deadlines in my office that the finance division, had to meet in order to encumber contracts, after which there was this sort of blackout period that straddled the end of the fiscal year and the beginning of the next fiscal year due to personnel leave. And I think we're coming out of that blackout period and are going to be, as I understand it, although I'm not in the weeds on the contracting, able to start getting the sort of remaining contracts out the door.
Marvelous. Thank you. That's very, very helpful context, particularly for anyone who's going to be watching a recording of this meeting. So with that, and I just did a very rapid fire, do we have any questions, comments, or concerns about the financial information I'm sharing right now?
Hey, Deb, the only question I have is just 'cause as I'm familiarizing myself with the process, do we have other funding that's already essentially been obligated to?
Yes, I can show you. Let me stop sharing and then I'll pull up another document that Grayson shared with me that is wonderful. And I'm happy to share any of these documents with anyone. It's all public information. There we go. Now let me share my screen again. I actually reviewed this last night and I have not had a chance to fulfill a request that was made of the committee, and that is to actually do an analysis of what still needs to go out, what's gone out versus what needs to go out. But this is a spreadsheet called approved spending for 2025. But what you can see in Grayson, correct anything that I say. I'm still new to this, but what you have all the way up on the left are the different contracts, different recipients of the awards, along with the contract numbers. You'll see the start dates and the end dates, and then the schedule of first payments and second payments. And you see that that does actually extend into FY26. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit for anyone who has sensitivity to that. You will also see down toward the bottom that there are some payments going into FY27. Where they did not have payouts in FY25, they're going to start in 26 and go into 27. Excellent question, and please keep asking. And again, if you would find this spreadsheet helpful, I'm happy to share it. Anyone that wants anything, please let me know. Other questions, comments, or concerns before we move on in the agenda? Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right.
Deb, I
And
have just a couple of questions. If you could put up the July, or it doesn't matter which tab of the
reconciliation.
yes.
Okay. You should be seeing August right now.
Okay. Okay. I guess my only question is, and I'm not, I'm a lawyer. I don't know anything about accounting and how to represent things. I see in the top left, the expenses category, and I wonder, for the committee's sake, whether there should be some discussion of breaking that out in terms of, as Deb, you talked about, there's Recovery Council staff expenses, but then there's different vendors the council uses or has used and will increasingly use. But then there's also, I think, one thing I'm wondering about there in that line is the expenses under the contracts themselves. So, they all have indirect expenses. So that's money that's not, as I sort of rudimentarily understand it, not going directly to abatement services and programs, but going for indirect expenses. And I just wonder if at some point the committee ought to have an understanding of the impact of that.
So just so that I understand, are you proposing that, for example, Lakes Region that was awarded 75,000, that we get more of a detail of how they're spending their awards?
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially, each of them does financial reporting, and,
Yep.
I'm not suggesting that this committee go into, although it could, I suppose, the weeds of each financial reporting by each grantee. I'm really wondering about and maybe you can't do it any other way. The council has an indirect cost policy that is meant to mirror, I think, the states. And to the extent that, that can be attributed to each of the contracts, whether that would be useful information for the committee.
Yes. And it's interesting that you're bringing this up. Oh, go ahead, Pat, before
So I was just going to sort of respond a little bit to that. I see that more in, there has to be a way that we receive yearly, or however we put in the contract, financial reports from grantees. And in that, there should be a breakdown in that would tell us in more detail what was indirect, what was direct cost. And again, sometimes it's hard to look at because, again, all of these contracts are different. Some went to buy a building, some went to, pay for staff, but again, I see that more your question in, as we look at, and that was one of my questions, is at some point in time, we have to find a way that we review the financials as a finance committee and give recommendations. And as we discussed at the last meeting, any ones that we have concerns about that we're seeing as we look at these finances, are they not spending their money? Are they overspending money? Those kind of things that we able to red flag those.
And I think, so the answer is yes, yes, and yes, for a couple of reasons. One, around the indirect policy is we recently had the opportunity to really look at the indirect policy that we have because there were some questions around interpretation. And I am not a lawyer, just like I'm not an accountant, but I would say that there's language in that policy that is open to interpretation depending on who you are and how you're choosing to view it. So I think at some point we probably need to talk about that, whether it's in this committee or if it's outside, or if we need to seek some legal guidance around interpretation, because I can tell you that I took the language to the department and the entity that would have been responsible for adhering to that particular policy or otherwise. And the department has one interpretation of it, but an organization has a different interpretation of it, which is, again, a little bit of a challenge. So I don't know if we'd want to do that here. It seems to make sense to do it here. But that's one. And I think maybe we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting, is to look at our indirect policy. So let me write that down so I don't forget.
And Deb, one thing that the council did in the past as it was developing its indirect policy was it also looked at what other state councils were doing on that approach. And I suppose that could be sort of ginned up again.
Yeah, and yes. And I think
as a policy matter, that is.
Yes, because it definitely has come up recently, and we need to all be operating from the same lens. And when a policy like that comes into question, usually there's something a little sticky, and so it will be really important for us to have that. Secondary to that, in terms of how a contract is spending, not spending, monitoring their financials and otherwise, at the department, that's where our contract managers come in, and they're watching the spends at all times, and they're watching to see if they're spending too quickly and there's a concern that they're going to run out of money. If we are not getting financial reports that we expect to get and that are required, that's all part of contract management and making sure that we're reaching out to our vendors or awardees, whatever we want to call them in this setting. And I am still not clear who we have determined is going to do that. Is that now going to be very done? Is that us? But there is a lot of micro monitoring of spend and spending trends. And I'm not sure if that's a determination that we need to make, if it needs to go to the larger council, but really those reports do need to be monitored.
Pat, is that role part of the RFP for contract management?
I think it is part of their monitoring contract. But again, I think that the finance committee should have some sort of role in either they're reporting to us anyone that they're flagging or concerns about, that the finance committee be able to say, okay, we see what you're saying. And then again, that's reported to the full council as to what the finance committee is recommending. But I think the actual monitoring of it, the reviewing of it, goes with the contracted managers, with them bringing to this committee any financial concerns that they're flagging. So probably have some sort of meeting with them regularly, that they're just reporting on what they've reviewed. Makes sense to me.
I agree with that. Do you think that it would make sense to have them attend this meeting on a regular basis or on a periodic basis so that they can report any concerns? Would their concerns go to Chastity and Chastity would pass them along to us? I guess my question is, what is the process? And we don't have one yet, but we need to establish one.
Yeah, we need to talk about it. Yep.
Okay. And along those lines of monitoring spending and concern and otherwise, in our last MRC council meeting, we did talk about needing to pull back a contract, terminate a contract, and the potential for paying back of awarded funds. which prompted a question for me, and we didn't get to it in the meeting, but what is our recourse for recouping funds? Particularly if an awardee doesn't give them back. Just wondering.
Yeah, I mean so that with the contract that the council talked about at its last meeting, there were three buckets of money at issue. One is their next payment, because it was a 2-year contract, and their next payment just won't get made. So that that money
Just
is
stays. Just
yeah,
stays.
unobligated or deobligated or whatever, however you want to call it. So that's the easiest bucket. The second easiest bucket is of the money that that was sent to the grantee. Any money they haven't spent would be money that they would need to return. And it's my understanding, that the council's in the process of gathering information from the grantee about its spending so it can determine whether there's any unspent funds. But the unspent funds are sort of the second easiest ones to get back. And the the one that's probably, more challenging is to the extent that money has been spent and, there's room for disagreement about whether it was spent pursuant to the deliverables under the contract. On those last two categories, it's, some combination of, I think, the Recovery Council staff communicating with the grantees on a cooperative level and to some degree, my involvement, if those discussions don't go well, engaging in some further discussions about whether there are parts of the contract that need formal enforcement.
I see. And I'm not asking specific to that particular contract, but just in the future, should we have projects that for whatever reason the contract is terminated, which could be for any number of reasons, what is our recourse in recouping funds, or if we find that funds are being used for things other than contract deliverables?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth, again, sort of foundation, like restating a foundation of the council's operations, which is because, the council gives its money out as a grant on the front end, as opposed to a reimbursement method of payment, the way other state contracts operate. And, that's in part because of decisions that are made in my office because we hold the bank account. And at least one potential reason is just like we're not equipped to operate an invoicing system for 50 to 100 contracts a year. So that to the extent that this committee wants to have conversations about other ways to do things, that would be fine. But just sending money out on the front end makes it a little bit riskier, which is part of why we have a lot of contract terms so that we have rights to enforce.
That's helpful. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay.
Hey, Deb.
Yes, please.
So as it relates to the indirect costs part of the discussion, like for the next meeting, what specifically are we going to be addressing? Is it really what are allowable costs under the indirect costs component?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Specifically, yes. And I can certainly also highlight the areas that have come into question recently. Chastity?
I just wanted to add one thing to what Brendan just said about the funds up front. Another piece of that too is the first council. There was a lot of feelings about not doing a reimbursement model to lower some barriers, especially for smaller programs who don't have the funds to wait to be reimbursed. So there's a lot of factors at play that will need to be thought about when it's looked at again.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very real consideration, and very valid. And these are grant awards essentially through a contract and don't have to be managed the way the department manages. But I appreciated what Brendan said, that there is an acknowledged modicum of risk involved in front loading the payments. And
And, the last council had a number of discussions about the, how slow the contracting process was and how lengthy the contracts are and things like that. And, one of the things that comes up in contract negotiations is, are those provisions that are more protective of the state and these funds. For example, being able to terminate a contract for convenience rather than for cause. That's a really important clause for these funds. And it's, contract negotiations sometimes slow down. But these protections as we're learning in real time, are valuable.
yes, thank you. Any other comments on this before we move on to contract updates? Okay, moving on to contract updates. Chastity, do you have anything? Grayson, Elizabeth, Pat, anyone?
Yeah, I can do this. I can share my screen really quick and just show you where we stand for our remaining contracts. Can you all see this spreadsheet?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So we have 4 contracts remaining to go out for a November 3rd start date. And then we have a couple of amendments to do, and they are all either scope of work. Yeah, I would qualify them all as scope of work changes. There's no financial changes or no changes to any payments or anything like that. So no financial things on these. But so these are the contracts we have left to go out. One of those is the Maine CDC MOU, and the others are 2 of them. I believe 2 of them. The providers have been reviewing them. They just missed the previous signature deadline, and then York County is our last one that we're in the process of finalizing those deliverables. Barry Dunn helped us develop those, so we're in the process of reviewing what they've helped us with. And our goal is to send those to providers beginning of next week to give them a full week to review before our signature deadline. So, but that's where we stand. So we have about a little under 2 million left remaining contracts before, and this is our last batch for the 2024, the first allocation, our first grant award. So
I have a question about the CDC. Is there a reason why for this last payment it's $1 million up front? Because I did notice on the spreadsheet that I shared earlier with all of the contract dates, they initially had 500,000 and 500,000, 2 payments, each of 500,000, and this one is just the full $1 million. Grayson?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some context on that. When I put that spreadsheet together, it was before we had begun development on any of these new prevention contracts. So I was really just guessing on what the distribution would look like. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That helps.
And then depending on how some conversations go in the next few days, this may change. We don't need to go into that fully now, but the CDC may be interested in splitting this MOU. And so they may be interested in just getting part of that now and part of that later. So this amount actually may decrease depending on how that conversation goes. But just wanted to put, I guess, some might thought it may be better to put the highest amount, but in some cases this may change to 350,000, but this would be the highest amount. So, but yeah, this is where everybody stands. So
marvelous, thank you. And I'm assuming, and when I say I'm assuming, what I'm really doing is checking in with the group. I'm assuming that based on my read of the MOU, if the CDC would like to make changes, the MOU indicates that can be done provided both parties to the MOU agree. So that means the CDC would have to agree and MRC would have to agree. And I'm assuming that that would be a vote at the full council. Is my
Yes,
assumption accurate? Okay, just,
the current draft hasn't been approved either, so I think we're still in that phase of developing
okay,
too. So
because it has
there's,
not been signed yet. Okay,
yes, yeah.
perfect.
And since Brendan has been on vacation this week, we also haven't talked to him, or not on vacation, but at a conference. We haven't been able to talk to him about their questions about the timeline and whether splitting it into two is feasible or something that we want to do. Or would be in the best interest of either party. So that's a little bit up in the air too, depending on how all of those conversations go. But that's why we wanted to talk to you later just to see if you have a sense from the department's view of why breaking it down may be the best case from their perspective, just so we can have that background information. But just so everybody is aware, that may get broken down into depending on how those conversations go in the next few days.
Yeah, and I may have a question for Brendan about that. I believe I understand why they're asking, and I believe I understand why it makes sense, but it has to do with the account itself and whether or not the account is a carryover account or a lapsing account. Probably not using the right terms, but some of the department accounts will carry over from year to year and some don't, they lapse. And so that I think might be part of what they're factoring in, which is legitimate. Okay, any other updates on vendor support? We had to go back to the drawing board, I believe, around RFP review. And so I don't believe we have any updates for that other than, oh, Chastity?
Sort of, but not really. I mean, yes, not on the RFP. So that is being redone. So in the interim, when we met with Barry Dunn last week, their current contract is up at the end of this month. And we didn't use them for the full amount. So they are willing to stay on if we can do a no-cost extension, which I understand from Brendan. Because there's no money, we just need Pat to approve it. So we just need to decide on how long that is. I think personally, I would say don't just do a month and do a couple months, knowing even when we choose our vendor with the RFP, it's not going to be immediate. So put it out a little bit so we still get support from them. So that's the only update.
I would recommend to December 31st.
Perfect. I'll take it.
We tend to, I'm hearkening from what we do here, but it makes sense to end it in the I know we usually operate on the fiscal year, but to end it in the calendar year when we're working with extensions, that tends to be a fairly standard practice we use. It seems to make sense in this particular scenario, but I am one voice at the table.
Yeah, and we're not even going to have the Program and Grants Committee can approve the RFP, but that means even if they approve of someone at that September 30th meeting and say, this is the contract that's going through, then of course we all know contracts aren't going to come up immediately.
Right.
So giving till December 31st makes sense. That's, 2 months out. So we should be able to have a contract be able to be done at that point. So we don't have any lapse.
Sorry, I
Chelsea?
want to clarify. Program and Grants is only making the recommendation. They're not approving. The full council still needs to approve at the October meeting for the RFP.
Why did I think we gave them full authority?
Because we did on something else
Okay.
for an amendment that we no longer need.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I knew there was something they had full authority for.
yeah.
So that contract won't be approved until the October meeting. Okay.
All right, we have accomplished our agenda. The last item is anything other. So if anybody would like to raise any other agenda topics or items for the good of the group, the floor is yours.
I have one. So my thing is, I hate money sitting in a bank. Um, if we have, at least this is what I'm asking finance. We need to know exactly how much money with the contract. I know we can't guess how much they didn't spend or they owe us, but we do know the full amount of that last year of their contract. Do we or do we not?
You're talking about the COSI contract?
Because I don't see any reason, and the finance committee can certainly chime in, that funding isn't going to programs and grants for a recommendation as to what we do with that money. But I think the finance committee, if you needed to further out those years that we're sort of, have gaps in, I understand that. But if we have this money that was supposed to be spent, I would like to be able to say the finance committee says you have this much money. What is your recommendation? Again, and they could either do more SSPs if more were developed since then, or they could take some of the other grantees is scored that didn't receive funding and look at those. I'm not suggesting we go out for an RFP process, but how much money is there in that contract not going out?
Yeah, I just have to look at the contract and see what we agreed to pay them in year 1 and year 2.
225 is what they would have gotten year 2, because it was
225.
3 certified sites. The vote originally with that money was for state certified SSPs. There have been multiple who have gotten certified since that we did not fund with our SSP money. And Carolina is supposed to be sending over a list of all the certified sites, so that way we have all the information to make that decision of what we want to do.
Okay, and this committee doesn't see any reason why it has to be saved. It can be spent.
Well, it's essentially, as Brendan said, unobligated funds. So when we terminate the contract, we terminate the obligation. So they're no longer encumbered.
So
Right.
Pat, just so I understand what you're asking, is you're thinking that the finance committee should kind of give that money to the program and grants committee to decide how to spend it?
Yeah, so sort of, not really that, other than just to sort of in consensus that we don't need that money. That money doesn't need to be to fill in a gap year, 2 years down the line that we lose money, and that this money is unspent money. We didn't have more expenses than we thought we had, but basically we have this money. Let's spend it in the community. And let programs and grants decide on how it is. But just that finance committee has said it's perfectly good to spend it.
I would certainly agree with that. The question is, should we recommend it be spent in the community where it is not going to?
Interesting.
Brendan?
If I was following, maybe it's Pat or Deb's so explanation of the impact of the money on Deb, I think you were saying this, the impact of the money on the council's budget. I'm thinking about the budget spreadsheets that Ben had created showing the out years and how much, if we spend all of our money now, we're in the red, and if we don't spend all, and how the different toggles affect things. And essentially what you're saying is if we were looking at that sort of out years budget, this money wouldn't change that because it's already accounted for in the budget as being out the door in those out years. So if the council just reallocates it, it will have zero impact on that out year's budget.
Thank you.
Okay. I was sometimes I find it helpful to explain what I think I know so people can tell me how I'm wrong.
Anything else for the good of the group? Chastity? Was that your hand up?
It was. That was
Okay.
quicker than finding my
Yeah, I
button
get
again.
it.
So something for this group to think about and eventually have discussions on, with governance looking at the bylaws to see how changes could be made for the ED to approve expenditures. I think this group needs to discuss an amount, what type of expenditures, et cetera, that is. So it's a twofold decision before it goes to the council.
So Chastity, you're looking at a recommendation from the finance committee of how much an ED could approve without full council approval. Yeah.
Yeah. And like being able to approve council mileage and stuff instead of sending it to Pat and adding like just the simple admin stuff that we can remove from the chair and have staff do.
Chastity, I'd say you're in the best position to give your recommendation because you kind of know what you do and what's kind of a hassle to go through Pat for. What would you recommend?
Well, I'd also say Pat on the pieces she thinks don't need to come through to her.
Mhm.
Like I think definitely mileage. Honestly, I probably also think differently than Pat. I think some things, like the consultant stuff, like Barry Dunn and whatnot, that's all already approved. There's no reason the ED couldn't approve those payments. I don't know. I don't know other ones off the top of my head. I'm blanking on it after I brought it up. So that's on me. Thanks, Paul.
Well, if we use the example today, so today we needed to, we're going to extend the contract, or talked about extending the contract to Barry Dunn. And they had leftover funds, well, I shouldn't say leftover, carryover funds that the council approved of. So Jesse emailed me, I looked at it and I said, seems reasonable to me, I would approve that. Again, if the council had already approved so much money and we were extending that contract, you would think that Chastity as the executive director would have permission to do that. She certainly would report that to finance and to the council, but she would be able to give the initial go ahead because that money had already been approved. So now we had to take the extra step of, again, it's just me looking at it and approving it, but I think it's an unnecessary step, particularly where the council had approved the dollar amount. She's not going over the dollar amount. Plus the fact she should be able to approve, I would say at least, I don't know what, there's this accounting standards, but she should be able to approve mileage if Elizabeth wanted to go on to a conference, reasonable things that we haven't bumped into. But when Mary was there was all this stuff about airfares and all this stuff that had to filter through me. Once the council had approved her to go, the ED should have some say as to, getting a hotel room. Shouldn't have to go through me. Those things. So I'm sure there's an accounting dollar for, I don't know what the word would be for, to ensure that fraudulent things didn't happen, that there are guidelines to that, and that we develop those financial guidelines so that the executive director, Chastity, has some responsibility financially of making decisions.
I think it gets back, Pat, to the conversation that we had in the full council around operations and what are our rules and what are our operations. So when I think about the opioid settlement funds and going out into communities and funding projects and funding entities, that to me is a full council. That is about the use of the opioid settlement funds for the greater good of the public and otherwise. When I think about whether or not Elizabeth wants to go to a conference and has mileage, to me, that's an operational task. And that's not really indirectly, it's about communities because ostensibly Elizabeth is going to learn something and bring something back that's going to be a benefit to the council and ultimately benefit to the community. But that to me is just a standard operating process. And some of the things that you were talking about mileage and ED expenditures and otherwise, I'm not entirely sure that that's a finance committee decision and recommendation, or if that falls under the operational policies and procedures that we don't have but are looking to develop.
Yeah, nor do we have an operational budget. I mean,
right.
if you look at yourself, I look at myself as an executive director. When I ran an agency, I had a budget. Now, yes. I had to live within that budget. I didn't have to run to the board to say we're out of Post-it notes. I had a budget that to live by. Chastity our executive director does not have a budget at all, an operational budget. So she can make decisions. And I think, Deb, what you're hinting at is at some point in time, we need to have those policies and an operational budget to hand over to our executive director.
That is what I'm saying. And I think that in terms of public transparency, and whoever from the public is listening in on this meeting, I'm glad that you are, because I think that what we do is we figure out some of these things and then come back to the larger meeting where we do have the public with us. And maybe the public can be part of the conversations. That's fine. But to say, this is what we're proposing. We're proposing that operationally speaking, I don't know, for the staff of the MRC, X percentage of dollars can be used toward the operation of the MRC as opposed to just fully sending it out into the community. And I don't know what that X percentage is, but I think that that's a reality, because if we don't allocate any amount to the operations and to the staff, we will not be able to do anything. And so it's a necessary function of the MRC. I think our responsibility is making sure we're good stewards of the settlement funds and we don't over suggest funding, that we make sure a majority of the funding is going out to the communities. That's our task. But to say that we can't spend anything on operations doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because we can't function.
And do you feel that the operational budget would be controlled by the executive director?
It would be approved.
I would argue that case. I don't think that needs to go to the finance committee per se. And Daryl, I know that this is your first meeting, but feel free to chime in from a financial place. But I mean, to me, when I think of the finance committee, I'm thinking about the bigger picture, and I'm thinking about the use of the funds in a bigger, broader sweep than the granularity of Chastity just approved $25 in mileage. We do have those reports. We have them. I clumped them into the staff expenses. So if anybody wants to know, we have an accounting of that. But that is an internal operational thing, as opposed to we have chosen to fund Needlepoint Sanctuary X amount of dollars. Needlepoint, I just used you as an example. I hope that's okay. But that's my opinion. We are a committee.
I would agree with that, Pat and Deb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree as well. I mean, I think the intent is to make sure internal controls are in place and, operating effectively. And I think we can, I think the executive director can approve expenditures and report accordingly, and we can have that visibility into the expenditures that have occurred. And so I don't have a lot of concerns over this conversation. It makes sense operationally.
Thank you. All right, well, we have work to do. We have work to do as the larger MRC as opposed to just the finance committee. But I also think that we need to have our own standard operating procedures and policies and otherwise as a finance committee. So between now and the next meeting, I'll give some thought to that, and I welcome any thoughts and ideas and perspectives around that piece too. And that I do think falls under our umbrella and our role and responsibility. All right, we have made it through our agenda. Does anybody have anything else before we adjourn? Okay, thank you, everyone. Welcome, Daryl. We are so happy to have you. I am so happy to have you. And
Speaks for all of us. Have a good weekend, everyone.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.